We are in the middle of chapter 10, Perek Yud. Last week, we discussed the existence of a tzaddik. And we are focusing firstly on the tzaddik she'einoi gomer, the tzaddik whose love for Hashem is not complete. That, how do we know that his love for Hashem is not complete? Is because he's not 100% transformed the nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, the vitalizing soul that's in him, whose nature is to lust after delightful things, which by the nature of the human being, delightful things means physical things. And since the tzaddik she'einoi gomer is not absolutely cured from the ability to desire physical things, then he's obviously not transformed his animal soul completely to be absolutely 100% pure in its love for Hashem and nothing else. In order to understand more clearly how the animals, how the tzaddik she'einoi gomer, also known as the tzaddik vera loi. Welcome back, Rebbetzin Kainer. Now our group is complete. In order, oh, now our group is even more complete. Watch this. Hello, Chaya. Try it again. Hello, Chaya.
Hello.
Welcome back.
Thank you. It's good to see you.
Are you in Spain?
I am. Yes, I'm in Barcelona.
Amazing.
How are you?
We are well. We're happy that you're here.
Thank you.
We just got started, so we will just start again and we'll edit this part out of the video so that we won't have any personal things on the web.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. No. We're glad you're here. Good morning. Yeah, okay. Good morning, everyone. We are in the middle of chapter 10. We are in the middle of describing, analyzing the different levels of tzaddik. We have a tzaddik that is called tzaddik she'einoi gomer. He's not complete. He's also known as the tzaddik vera loi, a tzaddik who has evil to him, but that evil is subjugated to him. He's got it under control. He is not called a tzaddik gomer, a complete tzaddik. He is not called a tzaddik v'toiv loi, a tzaddik who has only goodness to him. And the question that the Alter Rebbe will address today is, how do you know? What is the bar? What is the line that you have to cross? What is the level that you have to graduate in order that you should be considered a tzaddik v'toiv loi, a tzaddik for whom there is only goodness? Here's a caveat, side point. The Alter Rebbe writes many things in the Tanya, many things. And the Rebbe insists, our Rebbe insists, that everything the Alter Rebbe describes in Tanya is relevant to each one of us. And therefore, even though in this chapter, we're focused on the tzaddik, and being the tzaddik, especially being the complete tzaddik, is something that is beyond the reach of most people. Nevertheless, it is our obligation to reach for this, to strive towards this, and see if we can't experience it for a minute here, a minute there, once a week, once a month, once a year. It's something that we are certainly capable of in short spurts and to one degree or another. That's quite unlike the tzaddik who experiences the life of the tzaddik always and on the highest level. We can experience the inner dynamic of the tzaddik for very short spurts and to one degree or another, depending on our spiritual capacity. That being said, what defines the inner dynamic of the tzaddik? Bir ha'inyan, that's where we're up to. The explanation of this matter, in order to explain in detail the level of the tzaddik that is not complete, also known as the tzaddik who has evil to him, which means that although he doesn't sense any urge towards evil, nevertheless, he has not fully transformed his animal soul into a being that yearns for holiness. That means that the animal soul still has all of its proclivities. It's just absolutely silent. Kihine tzaddik gomor, because let's do a juxtaposition. Let's do a compare and contrast study. Let's look at the tzaddik who is complete. What's his inner dynamic? When you have a tzaddik who is complete, who has transformed any evil that was in him to goodness, now all he has is goodness. It's our good fortune that from Monday through Friday, we have a Zoom meeting each morning at 7:15 for the men. We are learning Chassidus. It's us rookies learning very advanced stuff. So sometimes it's funny but it's always good fun and very inspiring. And just this morning, we learned that everything in the world is created of 3 layers. And those 3 layers are squared, cubed, in fact, because every layer is made of 3, and those layers are subsequently made of 3. And those layers go side to side as well as up and down. So it's a complex system of layers, and each layer has a particular interplay, a particular way that they connect with the other people, with the other layers. So what we learned this morning is you have the soul, but the soul requires a vessel in which it can arrive, like a vehicle that could transport it from its divine place to the physical world, to the created space. And then in order to interact with the creation, it needs garments. So there's the soul, there's its vessel, and there are the garments that it uses to interact with creation. The soul is 100% divine, one with the Creator. The vessel is devoted to divinity, even if it's not one with the Creator. It's called batul. It's in a constant state of bitul, meaning it's a vehicle. It has no will of its own. It has no desire of its own. It has no opinion. It's a vehicle, but it is not the Creator the way the soul is. The soul is a veritable piece of the Creator. The vehicle is not. It's just absolutely devoted. And then you have garments. Garments is a layer that is created. It's a product of klipa. It's a product of the husk, the shell. It's a product, it emerges as a result of Hashem's restraining himself, restraining his presence, restraining our awareness of him, allowing for the existence of beings who consider themselves independent from God. Okay? Now, each of these things has layers. There are layers among souls, meaning you have very talented souls on the highest level, and they are capable of achieving tremendous spiritual things during their lifetimes. And then there are souls that are average talented, and then there are souls that have very little spiritual talent. We are familiar with the terms nefesh, ruach, neshama. Souls that are from the level of nefesh of neshama have very little talent. That's the lowest level. Souls that are of the level of ruach are average. Souls that are of the level of neshama are highly talented, highly skilled. In the language of the Arizal, as brought by Rav Chaim Vital, everyone is born and their soul is firing at the level of nefesh, the lowest. Then they mature and they achieve the arrival of the ruach of their soul, which means they achieve an average, most people achieve the average amount of spiritual talent. And if the person is righteous, and if the person is pious, and if the person is worthy, then Hashem will bless him with the neshama of his neshama, and then he can be a tzaddik. Then he can be a completely righteous person. This is all a discussion about soul, the actual soul itself that is a piece of divinity, it's a piece of Hashem himself. And the question of how can there be layers and levels if it's a piece of Hashem, we addressed this in chapter 1. Go back and look. Then you have the vessel. You have vessels that are on the level of the light within the vessel. You have a vessel which is the average vessel. You would call it the level of vessel within vessel. And then you have the level of garment within vessel. What's the difference between these three layers? The light within the vessel is very tied in to the divine spirit that it contains. It's transparent to the divine spirit that is contained inside of it. It's this level of the vessel, the light within the vessel, that's absolutely batel, that is absolutely a transparent vehicle for the soul that is inside of it. And if a person is blessed by Hashem, if a person is blessed by righteous parents who, through their conduct at the moment of conception, help to determine the level of this vessel, they can have a very refined vessel. Good morning. They can have a very refined vessel, even to the level of light. Their vessel could be so transparent, it could be like light. The average human being has a vessel that is a vessel, yeah, which contains the light. It conceals the light. It is not light itself, but it's ready to contain the light and to serve as the container for the light, also devoted completely. But it's possible that a human being will have a soul delivered to them in a vessel that is on the level of a garment. That means there's a hint of departure from its purpose. A garment is something that you can leave in your closet. A vessel for your soul, you cannot leave in your closet. Can you think of an example of a vessel for your soul? Of course you can. The body that your soul inhabits is the vessel for your soul. You can't hang that up in a closet and go about your business. Yeah, but the outfit you wore last Shabbos is not the outfit you're going to wear this Shabbos. You got it, right? I think those are the rules. Or the outfit you wore to Sheva Brachas number 1, you cannot wear to Sheva Brachas number 2. I'm pretty sure those are the rules. Because garments come off. Garments are separate from the person. So what if you have a vessel, a container, a permanent container for the soul that is experiencing a certain departure from its purpose? It's not 100% transparent to the needs of the soul. That makes it harder for the soul to express herself in the life of the person. You can have a person, you can have a person, a very powerful soul, let's say from neshama of neshama, the highest level of soul, but if the vessel that it was born into is of the lowest level, there's going to be a terrible fight in the life of that person. The neshama is going to have to fight very, very hard to express herself through this very coarse and somewhat distracted vessel. It's like trying to drive a car that has wheels turned in all different directions. It's going to be very hard. It's like working with a computer that's been pre-programmed like they have now. Your computers are programmed to get you to do certain things, to think a certain way, to buy certain products. It's a very aggravating life. All I'm trying to do is what I want to do. All I'm trying to do is what I need to do. And the computer's taking me in all kinds of directions. That's very aggravating. That's very frustrating. The vessel that I'm trying to use in order to obtain my goals has departed from its purpose. It's developed an opinion. That makes life very difficult. And then you have garments. The third layer is garments. And you have in the garment as well, you have garments that are on the level of light, garments that are on the level of vessels, garments that are on the level of garments. In other words, you have garments of a tzaddik. That's the one extreme. If your life is 100% neshama, your garments are the life of a tzaddik. If your garments are completely self-absorbed, then you're wearing the garments of a rasha, of klipa, of unholiness. And if you are the average human being, then your garments are in a constant state of tension between the nefesh ha'elikis, the yetzer hatov, your good inclination, and the yetzer hara, the nefesh habahamis, and your evil inclination. And that's the beinoni, that's the average human being. It's possible to have a person born with the garments of a rasha. That means they start off their life completely self-absorbed. That means their garments are those of a rasha. Who do you know born that way? Yeah, 99.9% of us are born that way. And then our purpose in life is to gradually grow starting with your garments, starting with the garments, thought, speech, and action, and to grow them towards the beinoni, and to continue to grow them toward the tzaddik. And one of the ways to do that is to tap into your neshama, to tap into your soul, to harness some of the energy of the divine spark that's in you. This tzaddik was born, this tzaddik that we're calling the tzaddik that's not complete, the tzaddik that we're saying has evil to him. What does that mean? It means that the garment or the vessel that contains his soul is not of the highest level. If it were of the highest level, he would be a perfect tzaddik, and from him, nothing self-serving could emerge. But it's more than that, because we're talking about a perfect tzaddik. Not only could no unholy or self-absorbed, self-oriented behavior emerge, no thoughts about such things could emerge, and he even has no urges that are self-oriented and self-absorbed. He's a tzaddik. Does this mean that he's the perfect tzaddik, that there is no evil to him? And the answer, says the Alter Rebbe, is no. Why? Because the only way to know that a person has truly transformed the vessel that contains their soul from created, emanated, whatever, from one of the lower levels to the level of neshama, to the highest level, to the level of light, where your vessel is so transparent to God and His Torah that it's like light. The vessel itself shines and yearns for goodness. The only way to know that for sure is if anything that is unholy, the opposite of goodness, makes you sick. Doesn't necessarily have to be physically sick, but absolutely aggravating. Some stories to this effect. There's a story recorded shared by Reb Chaim Shalom Deitch in Eretz Yisrael. He says it in the name of, he tells the story that it happened with the Maggid of Mezrich. I read the story previously that it happened with Reb Mendele Vitebsker. I read the story that it happened with Michal Zlotchever, also big tzaddikim, colleagues in fact. So I don't know which one is true, but as some historians are wont to say, as Rabbi Paltiel is wont to say, they're not telling stories like this about you and me. So it doesn't really matter who the story happened to. It was one of these two. There was a lady in the community that wanted to achieve some upper hand against the tzaddik, not Jewish lady, very pretty lady. And she walked into the Beis HaMedrash where the Rebbe was learning. Either it was the Rebbe the Maggid or it was the Rebbe of Michal Zlotchever. And when the tzaddik caught sight of her in her immodest dress, or caught a whiff of her perfume, as the story goes in the Michal Zlotchever version, the sight or the smell of immodesty upset them so much, they vomited. The unholiness, the opposite of holiness, upset them so much that it made them physically sick. This is what a perfect tzaddik looks like. This is what a person whose vessels and garments, as well as their soul, is completely attuned to Hashem and Hashem's purpose, that anything that is a distraction, not only are you not interested, it upsets you. It disturbs you. You hate it. It happened one time to the Chassid Pesach of the town Malastovka, that the opponents of Hasidus saw the way he conducted his Yiddishkeit, his davening, his learning, and they were upset with him. It was certainly a step away from the standard Orthodox practice. And so they hired some local wizards, whatever they had in those days, to interfere with him by sending inappropriate, lewd thoughts into his head during davening. And the chassid was very disturbed that he was having such thoughts. He couldn't figure out where it was coming from. So he ran to the Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe. And as soon as he walked in, the Alter Rebbe realized that this man was under a spell from wizards. I don't know what they called them those days. From whatever. Magicians, black magic people. So the Alter Rebbe, understanding that they had tapped in to this chassid through his animal nature. A human being is part animal. Not that we descend from animals, but that we have animal spiritual DNA in us, in our animal soul. That we delight, that we enjoy physical delights. Physical pleasure is something that's attractive to us. And that the wizards were tapping into the chassid's mind through his capacity to delight in physical things. And so the Alter Rebbe goes to the cupboard and takes out an apple and says to the chassid, "Do you like apples?" You enjoy apples? Chas is not going to lie. He says, yes, I enjoy apples. And the Alter Rebbe says, you're not ashamed to admit that you're attracted to physical pleasure? And the Chassid starts to cry because he knows that what the Alter Rebbe demands of him is better than what he just demonstrated. But it's true. But it's true, and so he had to admit that it was true, and it broke his heart. And he wept. And the Alter Rebbe asked him again, do you enjoy apples? And he said, honestly, yes. And the Alter Rebbe says, you're still not embarrassed to say that you derive pleasure from physical things? And this went on over and over and over. And slowly, at Pesach, this chassid is feeling how his interest in apples is physically waning. He's losing interest in apples. And he won't say something that's dishonest, certainly not to the Alter Rebbe, until finally the Alter Rebbe would say to him, do you enjoy apples? He says, no, I don't enjoy apples. And it was 100% honest. But that wasn't enough. The Alter Rebbe kept going at him again. And the chassid is crying his eyes out because he is obviously not on the level that the Alter Rebbe wants him to be. Until the Alter Rebbe finally got him to a level where the Alter Rebbe said to him, do you enjoy apples? And the thought of apples made him so sick that he, an average human being, threw up, vomited, just from the thought of, not from the thought of nourishing the body, but from the thought of taking physical pleasure from a physical thing. The Alter Rebbe had worked him through this exercise so that he could overcome his natural inclination to delight in physical pleasures, and in that way freed him from the spell of the wizards, and then sent him home, and he was fine. Did he stay that way forever? Unlikely. But the truth is, I don't know, but it's unlikely. The Alter Rebbe worked with him to get him to a place where physical pleasure was a disgusting thing to him. He couldn't even consider it. It was so repulsive. He could not even consider it. This is the life of a perfect tzaddik. What's the life of a tzaddik that's not perfect? The life of a tzaddik that's not perfect is you see physical delight and you're not interested, but it doesn't disturb you. So now let's learn in the Alter Rebbe's words the explanation, the description of the tzaddik's inner dynamic. When you have a perfect tzaddik whose evil, the evil with which he was born, is transformed to goodness, only then is he called a perfect tzaddik. And that's why he's called tzaddik, and it's good for him. So in the Maimer we learned this morning in the men's group, the Mittel Rebbe, the son of the Alter Rebbe, the son of the Baal HaTanya, says that it means that his garments, his vessels are all good. Whereas in the tzaddik who is not complete, whom we call tzaddik vera loy, a tzaddik to whom there is some evil, it doesn't mean in behavior, God forbid. It means that his vessels are not on the highest level. The vessel containing his soul is not on the highest level, or the garments through which his mitzvahs and service of Hashem are expressed are not on the highest level. So again, when the tzaddik has fully transformed every portion of himself so that every part of him is on the highest level, that's called tzaddik v'toiv loy. He's a tzaddik and everything about him is radiating goodness. How did he do this? Hu al yedei hasaras habgodim hatzoyim legamre mehora. That is through removing any of the dirty garments that are the product of evil. Dirty garments means anything that's a distraction from godliness, anything that's not on the highest level. What does that mean? let's describe it a different way. The animal soul needs to live. How does the animal soul produce life? So there's an example from the Gemara where the Chachamim, the Anshe Knesses Hagdolah, some of them prophets, prayed to Hashem, please take away the desire for idolatry from your people. We can't handle it. And Hashem did. Hashem diminished the overall spiritual sensitivity of all created beings so that no one should have such a desire for idolatry and the spiritual hit, the spiritual high that comes with serving idols. That was its most attractive component, is the spiritual high you would get. You'd go into euphoria. It felt so good. So Hashem diminished the whole spiritual sensitivity of all of creation. The opposite end of that scale was that prophecy also disappeared for the most part. Because when human beings are not spiritually attuned, when human beings are not spiritually there, then not only are foreign spirits not interesting, but also Holy Spirits, Hashem's spirit is farther out of reach. Prophecy ended then. It's a package deal. You want to be spiritually sensitive, you're going to have to struggle with idolatry. You don't want to be spiritually sensitive, you're going to have to struggle with a God whom you cannot hear. Not a God that you cannot hear. You're going to have to struggle with the fact that you cannot hear God speaking. And the Chachamim in those days, the Anshe Knesses Hagdolah and the prophets of those days decided that it's a worthwhile trade-off because of the destruction that idolatry brought to the Jewish people time and again. And then the Chachamim saw how they were successful and that Hashem was listening. And so they prayed to Hashem, please take away the desire for illicit sexual behavior. And Hashem granted their prayer. And the next morning, the Talmud records, they could not find a fresh egg in all of the land of Israel. Because that's the trade-off. You cannot be free of the desire for illicit sexual behavior without losing the desire for sexual behavior entirely. So there was no reproduction because nobody wanted it. The animal soul's nature is to desire things. Negative things? Not necessarily. The animal soul is a human being's capacity to desire things. The tzaddik removes from the animal soul any negative desires, any desires about things that are not exclusively for Hashem. Nothing more. The tzaddik didn't break the animal soul, removed it. What he did is he removed from it all the evil garments, any iteration, any expression of desire that involves something unholy, something impure, something that is a distraction from the service of Hashem. The tzaddik freed his animal soul from those impulses. So the tzaddik, not only does he not feel any urge towards those things, his soul is now incapable of any urge towards those things. And not only is the soul incapable of urges towards those things, in fact, the soul itself wants the only thing that is beneficial, and that is a bond, a connection with Hashem. The soul that yearns, the soul that lusts, the soul that wants is yearning and lusting and wanting a connection with Hashem. And anything that's going to interfere with that connection to Hashem is going to upset the animal soul terribly, even to the point of making the person physically sick. Let's take another step forward in the text of Tanya. Dehainu, this means, lim ois me'oid, to be tremendously disgusted, repulsed, betanuge elam hazeh, from physical pleasure, physical delights. Meaning, that doesn't mean you hate nourishing your body. It means you hate the idea of delighting in the physical. To delight in physical things the way people do. Namely, to fulfill the body's urges. As opposed to eating to nourish your body for the service of Hashem. That's what he hates. That's what disgusts him. Why should they disgust him? Because those behaviors, not the apple itself necessarily, the apple itself is from klipas noiga, that's true. But if you will eat the apple for the service of Hashem, you will reveal in yourself and in the apple divinity, a spark of holiness. If you'll eat the apple out of self-indulgence, for the delight and pleasure of the flavor of the apple, you are consuming, you are taking into your own person klipa and sitra achra, those forces that build a wall between yourself and Hashem, those forces that separate yourself from Hashem. And because a connection to Hashem is all that you, the perfect tzaddik, body and soul, that means divine soul, animal soul, and your physical body, all you wish for is a connection with Hashem, then the idea of klipa and sitra achra that repel a closeness to Hashem, that prevent closeness to Hashem, the very thought of those things is upsetting. You hate the very thought of those things. You are repulsed by any expression of those things. Anything that is of the opposition side. The complete tzaddik hates it with the absolute hatred. Absolute hatred means you wish it was dead. You wish it didn't exist. It interferes with your peace of mind. The very existence of those things interferes with your peace of mind. Why? Why should the tzaddik hate it so completely? An irrational hatred for things that are unholy. Machamas, that's because of the tremendous love, lust, yearning that the tzaddik feels for a closeness to Hashem, as we described. And for his holiness. This means for Hashem's holiness, the tzaddik is yearning for Hashem's holiness, that his life should be filled with it, and for the tzaddik's own holiness. The soul has an innate holiness, and the tzaddik is yearning for the experience of that holiness. And the two are really one and the same. The tzaddik's holiness, the holiness that comes to the tzaddik from his soul, is the reason why the tzaddik is so very strongly pulled to have a connection with Hashem. This is what the tzaddik wants. In other words, the tzaddik finds all the pleasures of his life from Hashem and from holiness. Nothing else in the tzaddik's life, nothing else in the world will give the tzaddik any pleasure. And we described this in a previous lesson. It's called the Be'ahava Rabba B'Ta'anugim. It's a tremendous love. It's a love of delights. And those are two different levels of love, by the way. Ahava Rabba, tremendous love, is enough to silence the distractions from the animalistic soul. But Ahava Rabba B'Ta'anugim, a love of delights, is enough to transform the animal soul, like we learned earlier. The Chiba Yesera Hanal, this tremendous appreciation, the tremendous yearning, love, closeness that the tzaddik has for Hashem is enough to cause him to hate everything that is the opposite of that holiness. Why is that the perfect counterbalance? Why is that the result of his love for Hashem? Because they are opposite of each other. They are the polar opposites of each other. It's possible, it is possible to enjoy two different things at once. Yeah. So why can't you delight in Hashem and also delight in apples? How come? The example given in the Heicha Menachem Tanya is you can sit at dinner in a fancy restaurant and eat a delicious meal and enjoy the meal, and at the same time enjoy the band, the music that the band is playing. You're enjoying two different things at once, and they're not of the same, and they're not even of the same style. You can enjoy some sweet music and some bitter foods. They're opposites of each other, and you can appreciate both of them at the same time. So how come loving Hashem completely necessitates that you despise physical pleasure completely? Why? And the answer is that unlike music and food, which are not on the same scale, and therefore they don't contradict each other, holiness and unholiness are two polar opposites of the same scale, and therefore you cannot find yourself at both ends of a single scale at the same time. A person can find themselves high up in the sky and cold. They're both called degrees. What degree of altitude are you experiencing? What degree of temperature are you experiencing? Well, I find myself, I don't know how to do this. I find myself at 10,000, I don't know, whatever, degrees in terms of altitude, and I find myself, or longitude and latitude degrees. I find myself a certain number of degrees to the east, a certain number of degrees to the west. And I find myself at 45 degrees Celsius. Yeah. It's not a contradiction because they're two separate scales. But you cannot find yourself, you cannot even, you cannot find yourself at 40 degrees Fahrenheit and at the very same time 80 degrees Fahrenheit. You can't. Those are two different places on the same scale. And therefore, not only are they opposite of each other, they contradict each other. One will necessarily interfere with the other. Holiness of Hashem and the unholiness of Klippa, they're polar opposites of the very same scale. And therefore, you cannot find yourself occupied with both of them at the same time. And exactly to the degree that you are occupied with Hashem is exactly the degree to which you will distance yourself from Klippa. Kedechsiv, as it says in Tehillim, David HaMelech testifies, Tachlis sinos senesim, with the utmost hatred do I hate them. Le'oyevim hayuli, they have become enemies to me. Chakreini v'dalevavi, search me and know my heart that I'm completely with Hashem. Because David HaMelech is completely with Hashem, therefore, anything that is in opposition to Hashem becomes an enemy to King David. Exactly commensurate to your love and yearning for Hashem will be your hatred and disdain, repulsion to unholiness and to Egypt and to evil. Vehamius bara betachlis. If a tzaddik, when a tzaddik achieves absolute love for Hashem, that means his soul obviously loves Hashem. The vessel containing his soul is transparent to Hashem. It shines brilliantly of holiness because of its transparency to Hashem. And the garments that he expresses his soul through are also brilliant and soulful. He's 100% good, 100% devoted to Hashem, and there is no expression and there is no hint and there is no presence of evil within him at any level, at any layer. then he will necessarily despise and be repulsed by evil in all of its incarnations. But that's not why. Because loathing, repulsion, is the opposite of love, same as hatred is the opposite of love. You hate the source of evil, and you are repulsed by expressions of evil. Don't hate expressions of evil because they're not intelligent. You hate the source of those expressions because they are intelligent, they have choices, and they know what they're doing. Expressions of evil are repulsive. Sources of evil are hateful. That's why the Alter Rebbe employs both languages. When we come back, the Alter Rebbe will apply all that we have learned to the life of the tzaddik she'enoi gomer, the tzaddik who is not completely 100% clean of any expression or any hint of any presence of evil. There's a story shared by the previous Rebbe and then later by the Rebbe about two brothers. One was very devoted to Hashem, a chassid, and the other was not very devoted to Hashem. Considered himself an enlightened Jew, secular, in other words. The religious brother was very poor, and the secular brother was very wealthy. And the religious brother had many children. And when it was time to marry off his daughters, he had to go to his brother, the wealthy man, and beg for assistance, for a dowry and those kinds of things. And it was never pleasant, because all his brother could talk about was his physical successes, his worldly successes. He would go to visit his brother, and his brother would give him a tour of this mansion and that mansion, of this castle and that castle, and one room and another room. This chassid lived in a house where the kitchen was the dining room, which was also the living room, which was also the bedroom. Simple life. And this brother had a separate room for eating. Not only have a separate room for eating, the room where you prepared the food was separate from the room where you ate the food. In those days, it was a strange phenomenon. You had a separate room for storing things. You didn't even put people in there. It was just for stuff. Yeah, so a whole room just for stuff. Anyway, the religious brother was not immune. He didn't care. He was not interested in all that physical stuff. But his brothers, the wealthy brother, noticed that his religious brother was nonplussed by all of his success, and he asked him, "What do you think about all this?" And his brother, the religious one, said, "Listen, you want to help me? Help me. You don't want to help me? Let me go, because this is not for me." So the brother begged, "No, stay a while, stay a while." And so the religious brother agreed. He stayed a little while longer. But the conversation went right back to where it was before. My successes and my farms and my paddy, my things, my orchards and my forests and my bank accounts and while he's describing all of his wealth and all of his riches, he does a deep sigh. Ugh. And so the poor brother says to the wealthy brother, "Why are you kvetching? Why are you moaning?" The correct Yiddish word is not kvetch. The correct Yiddish word is krechts. Why are you krechtzing? He says, "Because I have a certain animal," and of course the Rabbeim never said this animal's name. "I have a certain animal who delights in wallowing in the mud. Yeah, but I don't have enough mud for it, because now it can only be in the mud up to its nose. If it could get into the mud beyond its nose, it would be even happier. One final story. It happened one time that that a chassid had necessarily to make chassidim, to make friends. A chassid had to make friends in circles of irreverent people. And one time, one of these irreverent people started mouthing off, speaking disrespectfully about the tzaddikim of the generation, saying that the tzaddikim and the gedolim, really all they want is money and fame, just like Hollywood. Becoming a rebbe and becoming a gadol is quick access to money and fame. And the chassid answered him, let me tell you a story about a cow. Once upon a time, there was a cow. And this cow was no regular cow, because every Sunday, this cow would receive a special treat. Over Shabbos, the family would eat and drink and make merry on Shabbos. And on Shabbos night, the lady of the house would wash the dishes in a big barrel. And on Sunday morning, this cow got the privilege of drinking the dishwater from Shabbos night. And it was such a delight because there was morsels of food in there. There's all kinds of flavors in there. It was a real thrill for the cow to drink the dishwater from Shabbos. One Sunday, the water shows up, the water pail shows up, and it's just regular water. There's no extra flavors. There's no morsels of food. And the cow begins to wonder, what happened to my special water? It's Sunday morning. What actually had happened is that the lady of the house forgot. And on Motzei Shabbos, she washed the dishes and she spilled out the water down the drain. No big deal. But the cow is trying to figure out what happened to my water. And then he realized, and it made him very angry, because the lady of the house must have been jealous of my water and she must have taken it for herself. So the chassid tells this enlightened one, this irreverent person, he says, the cow with its animal brain cannot fathom that what she sees as delightful, a human being sees as absolutely disgusting and repulsive. No human being, no self-respecting human being who's not starving literally to death would drink dishwater. But the cow doesn't know that. The cow cannot know that. And therefore, when the cow sees the human being behaving like a human being, the only calculation, the only conclusion it can come to is something inside the context of its cow brain. The lady of the house wanted my dishwater. A tzaddik lives in a human world and yet finds finds human delights absolutely repulsive. But when the fickle human being comes and tries to study the life of the tzaddik and says, you know what he wants? Dishwater. That's why he became a tzaddik. That's why he became a rebbe, because he wanted my dishwater. You don't understand anything. That's how it goes. Anywho, thank you for joining. Have yourselves a wonderful week. And don't forget that tomorrow evening at 5 p.m. is the first haircut of our baby boy. Shalom. We'll see you then. Sei gesund.